Hello and welcome to BharatShakti.in. I'm Brigadier Chatterjee. We're going to be talking about the Galwan incident 3 years back from now today. To be more precise, I'll be talking about the 15th June incident in the night of 15th June at Galwan, which led to the death of 20 of our brave boys, led by their commanding officer, Col Santosh. Well, what happened there notwithstanding, what happened beyond that is also a part of the scope of my talk today. And for this talk, I have a guest whom all of you are familiar with. Nitin, welcome home once again. He's the editor-in-chief of Bharat Shakti, of Strat News Global and Interstellar, all three of them. But we always welcome him home once in a while. Well, Nitin.
Thank you. In fact, Bharat Shakti is the first website of our comprehensive media house. So, obviously, the preference is always for BharatShakti.in.
Oh, I would like to see more of it. Well, give us a brief perspective about what led to Galwan and what happened on Galwan on the night of 15th of June.
Well, broadly, almost everyone knows what happened in Galwan. Popular narrative is already there that 20 soldiers, Indian soldiers, died bravely fighting the Chinese. Outnumbered Indian soldiers laid down their lives. But what led to Galwan is important. And why, for the first time after 1975, there were deaths on the line of actual control between India and China is important to know. So, around April, end of April 2020, the Chinese, who normally do their exercises or their exercise in Aksai Chin, where their troops come there at the high altitude areas and normally go back towards the end of the summer in July or August or even later. But this time, without going back or without any warning, instead of rotating the troops back to their barracks, the Chinese moved westward towards the LAC in large numbers and then tried to intrude into Indian territories at various points, which are again well known, from PP14 down to Pangong Tso, north bank of Pangong Tso, between finger 4 and finger 8 and all that. So on May 5th and 6th, there were the first clashes on the north bank of Pangong Tso between finger 4 and finger 8. Visuals are now available all over the social media and the internet. But that led to some alarm in the Indian establishment, and there were phone lines burning between Delhi and Beijing at the highest level. And then they decided that there would be a corps commander level discussion to bring down the temperatures and diffuse the situation. So the first round of that corps commander level talks now, which have gone into 18 rounds in these last 3 years, took place on 6th of June 2020. Between the 14 Corps Commander and the Chinese equivalent or counterpart. So it was decided that wherever the Chinese have tried to intrude and wherever they have been stopped. So in between 5th and 6th of May to 6th June, India had rushed in more troops, more reinforcements, had tried to mirror the deployment of the Chinese along the LAC, because it was seen as an alarming development. So all that also happened. So then in the 6th June meeting, it was decided that wherever the Chinese are deemed to have come across, even 10 meters or 15 meters or 20 meters inside the Indian territory, they must go back. So while they were talking, and one of the main ingress from the Chinese side was in the Galwan Valley, at the bend of the river, the Galwan River, and under the shadows of the mountain, they had erected some temporary shelters and even some tents. So that was decided that the tents will be withdrawn or they will be removed from there. Now between 6th, after the decision was taken, and 15th, all this was to happen gradually. And 15th was a deadline for removing everything that was deemed to be in
all temporary structures
inside Indian territory, especially in Galwan. Rest were not so much of a problem because they were still on the other side of the LAC or very close to the LAC on the other side. So on that day, particular day, when the Indian authorities under 14 Corps and 3 Div realized that the Chinese tent has not been removed, the commanding officer of 16 BIHAR, which was responsible for that particular area, was told to go and check why the Chinese haven't removed and tell them that this needs to be removed instantly. So he went there, Col Santosh Babu, you mentioned, with his half a dozen people, a couple of officers and some other JCO and NCOs, to talk to the Chinese. So when he went there, the Chinese were straight away very belligerent and aggressive without even getting into a discussion. And argument ensued. He was under pressure. This was getting late in the evening. It was not yet dark, but the dusk was falling. And this was under the shadows of the mountain. So in that argument, some fisticuffs ensued or sort of broke out. And in that, Col Santosh Babu got injured in initial this thing. But reinforcements came from the Indian side. The Chinese also reinforced themselves. According to one account, which I have not been able to verify, the Indian team actually overwhelmed the first the Chinese team that was there and took those fellows forcibly to the other side of the LAC. That's where Col Santosh Babu was hit again, or was hit, and then he fell into the river. And that enraged the Indian side, and of course the Chinese came in larger numbers. And for the next 6 hours, there was a free-for-all at different phases. Clubs were used. So Chinese had come very well prepared. It was a premeditated attack. And many soldiers got injured. They fell into the river. Darkness fell by that time. And then what we know, the 20 Indian soldiers, but unspecified Chinese soldiers were also killed. Somebody has put out TASS. The Russian news agency has said 45 Chinese soldiers were killed in that clash. So that was that incident which triggered everything that we have seen post 2020.
I think there was one incident thereafter. We have no trust, no faith.
Absolutely.
In the PLA of the Chinese Communist Party, I would say. I would say China. They are from the party. Yeah. Well, you already talked about reinforcement being rushed in immediately after that. Tell us about the reinforcements in the Ladakh sector, Ladakh sector.
Sure.
That's our major focus. I'll get on to the reinforcement, etc. What has been the change in role and task of other formations later on?
Sure. So, as I mentioned, and as you know, and most of our viewers know, that Galwan was an inflection point. It sent shockwaves across the world. And this was a medieval kind of a fight. It was not, no bullets were fired.
Two nuclear powers
fighting with mace and barbed wires and clubs and baseball bats kind of a thing. With police kind of shields, which police use in riot gear. Those kind of things were happening. But it was certainly an inflection point. India completely lost the trust of the Chinese, because by doing this, they had violated at least 5 agreements that had been signed between India and China for maintaining peace and tranquility on the border. From 1993 to 2013, in those 20 years, there were 5 boundary agreements which have been thrown out of the window by the Chinese. So India said, we have to now stand up to them, sent in reinforcements like I mentioned. And among those reinforcements were, when the Chinese had amassed 60,000 infantry troops or armoured and mechanized troops along the LAC, India equally mirrored that deployment and some more. And additional division was rushed in, which was well acclimatized anyway. It's a reserve division of the Northern Command, which was initially rushed in. Then there were 17 Corps, which is India's Mountain Strike Corps. Parts of the elements of the 17th Strike Corps were brought into Ladakh at that point in time. And the Air Force played a major part. The best part of all this was that the Air Force also stepped in and rose to the occasion by utilizing its transport fleet, its helicopter fleet, and immediately aiding the army in deployment wherever the requirement was there. And by end of June, there was a stalemate that if they had 60,000 troops, India had 60,000 troops on this side.
What about, did we move any of this force headquarters?
Yes. So that happened later, around September, October. The Romeo Force, Counterinsurgency Force uniform, Romeo. Counterinsurgency Force uniform from south of Pir Panjal in Jammu and Kashmir was moved there. It was the RR Force, Rashtriya Rifles Force, which as a temporary measure was moved in there. Of course, 39 Division, as I mentioned, came from Palampur, which is the Northern Command Reserve. And some more, troops came in from other places. Of course, mechanized forces were moved in. There was one armoured independent brigade was already there, and some more were moved in there. So basically, what happened was that the logistics support that the Indian Army has built up over the years and practiced actually came into play and rose to the occasion again, like the Air Force.
This is my point. In fact, I would like to bring in the Air Force also into the story. For this build-up, there's a lot of synergy between the Air Force and the Army. If you can dwell upon it a little more.
So, Air Force moved a lot of assets from south of India to north of India. Normally, the Air Force's fighter planes take off from, the airfields based in the plains. Right. From Srinagar to right down to Bareilly and beyond to Gorakhpur. Or if you go to Hashimara and then Tejpur and Chabua, from west to east if you go, these are the bases in Adhampur, in Punjab, Bareilly in UP. If you just go eastward, so they were put in there. Radars were installed in Ladakh. Many personnel moved in for reinforcing the Leh Air Base, which is the lone air base there. And Srinagar was reinforced as far as fighter operations were concerned. Helicopters, Chinook and the Mi-17s played a major part. Transport aircraft like C-17C and they had strategic airlift aircraft like C-17, C-130 and AN-32s chipped in a large way to transport troops, ration, equipment, ammunition, you name it. And I remember going there in October 2020, and the kind of activity you could see where troops, habitats were raised, heated tents, heated shelters for Indian soldiers who were never deployed in those places in such large numbers. They also got those facilities. So I think all in all, in Army's logistics chain or logistics system, also moved in there by road. There was a third axis which was opened up in a hurry to Ladakh from Himachal Pradesh and the Air Force. So the synergy was seen, and Air Force had never deployed that forward. So it was even a new experience for the Air Force. So some of the problems did occur. Like their equipment was not designed or used to harsh winter conditions later.
Nor were the men.
Nor were the men, because the men and women were never deployed there. So all that has been a learning curve for both the Army, of course, not so much, but for the Air Force particularly.
Let's get back to the Army.
Yeah.
What about changes in role of some formations, etc., which were perhaps...
So as things progressed or didn't progress, then the Corps Commander level talks went on. As we know, India did a QPQ as a quid pro quo because there was pressure on the northern bank of Pangong Tso. And to put pressure on the Chinese, India actually climbed onto the Richinla and Rizangla range, or what is called the Kailash Range, overlooking the Moldo garrison of the Chinese, which on the other side. And also put tanks atop that ridgeline, which forced the Chinese to sue for peace or sort of ask for further talks for disengagement. From 6th round onwards or the 7th round onwards, now we have done 18 rounds, the Chinese tone and tenor changed. They wanted to compromise, they wanted to get the withdrawal done, because at one point in time, post August 31st, 2020, when Indian troops and the mechanized forces and the armor climbed onto Rizangla and Richinla, the tanks on both sides were 50 meters apart. It was a very volatile situation, very dangerous situation. If one spark was lit somewhere and if there was a mistaken fire also from either side, it would have led to greater escalation. But fortunately, because of these talks and this engagement which went on, they decided by February 2021, the disengagement started, which I'll come to later. But what you asked about reinforcements, so slowly India realized that the Chinese need to be now shown some kind of a deterrence. So one corps based in Mathura, one strike corps, which is supposed to be was supposed to look after Pakistan among the 3 strike corps, so 1, 21 and 2, actually got reorbited or the order of battle changed and got reorbited to being a strike corps for the Northern Command, and some of its elements got deployed in Ladakh. I think that was a major change in India's outlook towards China as far as military deployment is concerned.
Right. Well, it cost the government a lot, this kind of a movement, this kind of an infrastructure to be built over.
Of course.
Any idea about the...
So, one conservative figure that has been quoted or that has been talked about by people is But one of the mistakes that the Chinese made by doing what they did in April and May 2020 is to refocus India's attention to the northern borders. What India would have done in, say, a period of 5 or 6 years, from, say, 2020 or even 10 years, got squeezed in or telescoped into a period of 2 years or 3 years. And what India would have spent over a period of between 5 and 10 years in building roads, bridges, tunnels, shelters, ammunition storage, all that got telescoped in a period of 3 years. And one conservative estimate says that India has spent in Ladakh itself to build infrastructure, and including all this what I am talking about 1,200 crores, if not more, in these 3 years to strengthen the support for the Indian Army and the Air Force deployment.
You see, Air Force has possibly not had such a sustained commitment for a long time, building up big forces,
Sure.
logistics, like you said. So what are the lessons that the Air Force really took home?
So the Air Force also realized that it needs to have forward storage for their spare parts. Their people need to be acclimatized to harsh, cold conditions in Ladakh. They also need to have a logistics chain. And so therefore the synergy and what we are ultimately India is looking at as the theaterization, perhaps happened without any planning.
We did it.
And it is done. It has happened in Ladakh at least, or in the Northern Command of the Indian Army and the Western Command of the Indian Air Force are, I think, in so much of sync now that it's going to be difficult to separate them, even if somebody wanted to separate them, really.
Okay. There's a memorial that they have erected at
Galwan, yes.
Galwan, and you possibly visited that.
No, I didn't visit. I've seen the pictures and the some of the videos of that. Obviously, it's a tribute to the bravery of those soldiers who sort of fought the Chinese, resisted them. And obviously, I mean, you've been in the army, you know, CO is like father or a god, father-like figure or a god. And if the CO is touched, the fury of the soldiers is going to be tremendous. And that's exactly what happened with the Chinese, to the Chinese really, from by the 16 BIHAR and others who were there, other regiments which were there. There was a Punjab battalion, there were some RT units there, there were some air defense units. All these combined and, you know, did what they did. In Galwan, of course, losing in the process about 20 soldiers, including the commanding officer of 16 BIHAR, Col Santosh Babu. They will always be remembered. But as I said, Galwan was an inflection point. It changed the entire outlook of the Indian nation, not just the Indian Army or the Indian Air Force or the decision makers, but people. Now, everyone used to be obsessed with Pakistan and what happened to Pakistan or what Pakistan was doing to India or was trying to provoke India. All that is now, that fury has been directed towards the Chinese. So I think by doing what they did tactically, they have lost India strategically.
And actually speaking, I think they did us a favor. Exactly. There was a requirement for us to swivel in. Instead of looking west.
You had to look north, which has happened.
Which actually happened.
Yes.
Right. You know, it's not possible really to anticipate Chinese too much. So
sure.
It's difficult. I know the questions that I'm trying to put across to you. So what do you expect them to do next? Are you expecting similar things? Or can we say that they've realized that such tactical moves do not play the dividends that are actually...
Well, I don't think they've given up on whatever their ultimate aim was. But I mean, they will try and keep India under pressure by keeping those troops permanently or at least semi-permanently located along the LAC in those harsh conditions. So India is also forced to deploy, which means heavy expenditure. And we've seen permanent shelters coming up in Aksai Chin on the other side, in Rodok, in Moldo and beyond. So India has also now taken all the necessary steps, necessary infrastructure has been built. But my sense is these 18 rounds of talks, the disengagement when it was put down in writing for the first time, mind you, this is the other thing. In the 9th round when the agreement was arrived at, I think it was the 9th round in February 2021, they put it down in writing. Both sides, corps commanders have actually signed that agreement where they agreed to a 3-step process. Disengagement from all the points, wherever friction points as they are called. Second stage was de-escalation, which means troops will move back to 50, 60, 80 kilometers from both sides. And finally, de-induction of the Chinese forces from the thing. So a 3D formula was evolved. I'm told that we are now getting to the stage of the second D, rather than the third D, but the second D, where de-escalation is going to take place. Most friction points have been resolved. Depsang and Demchok is a separate issue because it's been carried on for a long time, legacy issue as it is called. But there also negotiations have taken place. One round of a Major General level talk has taken place. One step down, according to some reports, has taken place between the 3-div GOC and his counterpart about Depsang, the plains of Depsang and Demchok. That has taken place between them. So hopefully, once that is resolved, then we get on to the second stage of de-escalation is what the hope is. But we'll see. I mean, this is like going back to Sundarangchu in the 80s, where it took 9 years for the matter to be resolved between the two countries. But that time, such scrutiny and such hype and the kind of access because of satellites and all that was not there. So we didn't realize that a similar process was followed at that point in time. So we are at that stage right now.
Right. I think we'll wind up on that note. And thank you so much for having joined us. Do come in now and then whenever you find time.
Thank you. Thank you for this.
Thank you, viewers. Thanks for logging in. Do log in now and then with us, and you'll find us discussing interesting stories. Do get to our social media pages also. Thank you.